Hello, I'm Lindley Good and welcome back to Money Live and Insurance Innovators special broadcast series, Next Gen Customer Experience in Financial Services, sponsored by Smart Communications. Great to have you back with us. Now, we're here to tackle this year's biggest and most pressing customer experience issues, focusing this time on self-service automation. Again, we're joined by a wonderful lineup of experts from across banking, insurance and lending, including CEOs from startups and incumbent players. And of course, the FCA, all here over the next couple of episodes to share their plans for attracting and retaining customers in an increasingly uncertain and competitive landscape. Now, if you missed last week's episode 1, you can watch it on demand right now. We had a fascinating session with the CEO of Consumer Banking and Payments at Barclays and our expert panel sharing their vision for how you can build trust and loyalty with customers and ultimately reduce the number who leave you. Now, just a reminder that we really want to hear from you throughout the episode. You can share your thoughts and your experiences throughout our session by leaving a comment. Very simple, using the plus button below us on screen. Okay, before we kick off, a quick hello to Martin Suter again, who's the Chief Product Officer at Centis at Smart Communications. Martin, wonderful to have you back with us. How are you?
Hi, Lindley. Great to be here again. I'm back.
Great to see you again. Really good to see you. A big thank you to you, obviously, and also to Smart Communications for sponsoring our episode. We really couldn't do it without you, and welcome back. Okay. Let's get talking about self-service. It's such a hugely important issue and the automation that goes with it. We've seen a real increase in deployment of self-service. What do you think is causing this drive towards self-service?
Well, I think the starting point for this trend has been digitalization in our everyday lives. So mobile network devices have made us more independent of location and time. And these devices have ultimately also awakened the need for people to want to consume services at any time. On the other hand, I also see a kind of a self-inflicted fault of the industry in that they have not recognized the need of the customers. This is shown, for example, that the fact that many banks and insurance companies are only open during the day when customers are also going about their business.
Absolutely true. And, and we all want that convenience. I think even more so because of COVID, we need to have the services possibly in a feeling of emergency, even if the emergency isn't there. But how do you think the industry is doing when it comes to delivering not only self-service journeys, because there's a lot of that, but excellent self-service journeys?
Well, in order to be able to offer a self-service journey, I think it's necessary to automate and therefore also digitalize the external process as well as the internal ones. So these processes themselves are not static and are subject to rapid change. And therefore, the industry is forced to build up immense IT knowledge or to choose the right partners. So in the end, this cannot all be done at once and the right priorities has to be set.
Yeah.
So one of the important aspects is to be agile, which means that all the employees have to be agile. They also need to be able to change systems quickly and launch new apps. And this is where the cloud comes in, which allows for such a quick response and agile action. So I see kind of a direct correlation between self-service automation, agility, and the cloud. And the industry is the middle of this implementation, in the middle of that. But for many, I see that this agility is not yet universally lived, and it must be first be understood what this means.
So you would advise all industry players, whether you're in insurance and banking or lending, to get agile, to think differently, to start to try to speed up processes. Also have people within the organization who can think like that.
Exactly.
We're about to hear from the CEO of Molo on how she's shaking up the financial services industry. What do you think incumbents and even those working outside of lending could learn from the story of Molo so far?
Well, Molo has recognized that full service automation is possible in the mortgage and lending business. And this allows customers to consume this service flexibly and via digital channels. So this massively speeds up the process and eliminates the whole paper battle. So for me, this is a perfect example that digitalization is possible even for such complex processes.
Really interesting. We'll hear a lot more very shortly, but thanks very much, Martin. Good to see you again. A really helpful setting the scene as always. Okay, so let's now welcome Dr. Francesca Carlesi, co-founder and CEO of Molo, the UK's first digital lender. Great to have you here, Francesca. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Lindsay. It's great to be here with you today.
Great to have you here. So you're going to tell us a little bit about how you're making better use of automation to help customers during one of life's most stressful events, and that is buying a house or buying a flat. Well, first of all, how did that process that you've been through inspire the creation of Molo?
Yeah, so that's exactly how it happened for me. So the Molo was born because I had to get my first mortgage in the UK. As you probably can tell, I'm Italian, first time here, wanted to buy a house, big moment. And all of a sudden I crashed into a process that I just couldn't cope with, right? And it was mostly about all this paperwork that was required, the need to take an appointment at the branch, which I haven't done in ages, I guess. So I was like, why, right? Does it really need to be the way in the 21st century? And so after some investigation, turns out nobody had done anything about it. So we thought, okay, why don't we be the one that make it happen?
Yeah. And so what were the key, do you remember what were the key things that you came up against that you found were so slow? And I think we can all have our own experience of this, but were so slow or so difficult to understand and so difficult to control. What was it that really made you think this is no good? I can't be carrying on with this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember my experience. I think by now we also have many, many more customers that actually shared with us their experience. And so we know what the real pain points are. So, and I think there are many, right? But in general, there are 4 or 5 that are the key issues of this mortgage process. So I think number one is the huge number of paperwork required, right? If you think where we are, right? We live in an age where today you just click a button and you buy anything online. And yet for mortgage, you need to scan pay slips, scan, banking reports and things like that, which you never do ever. So that's really painful, especially for a lazy person like me, right? Digging out all these documents is difficult. Second, I think is that just depth and number of information you need to provide. You know, there are some forms to get a mortgage that ask you everything. Some of them even whether you smoke, and you wonder why is this needed, right? So that's just lengthy, time consuming, but also you wonder why, right? And I think thirdly is just the waiting time. So once you submit everything, it feels like everything goes in a black box. Nobody talks to you anymore. And then you need to chase. And after weeks, you might be told, well, yeah, you'll be declined, you'll be accepted. So this is really odd because there are 2 elements. One is the length and how long it takes. And you might want to close on a house and you might miss on that, right? In the meanwhile. But the second is this black box approach, the lack of certainty, transparency. And that's what we really wanted to change and Molo as well. And I would say maybe last but not least, which is something we find out along the way, working with our customers, that honestly, beyond the process, for a lot of people, it's simply difficult today to access to home financing. And not because they're fundamental issues, it's just because the way the process works, the way underwriting works, is almost like a cookie cutter approach, and it shouldn't be the way. So that's one thing we also want to change for good.
So, I mean, clarity, I think, and you absolutely talk about that. The clarity is so difficult, isn't it? When you really don't know where you are in the process or whether you're going to the next stage. So clarity is very important. Clarity is important not only as a customer, as somebody who's going through the process, also for the person selling. We all want clarity. Also, then, of course, that information doesn't come through, so you can't access finance. Do you find that having that transparency that you talked about is the key or one of the keys to allowing people to access finance that maybe they couldn't before?
Yeah, I think it's one of the keys, okay? Because for sure, transparency and clarity on the rules of the game is important, because then if you know the rules of the game, like in anything, then you can work for it, and you can, right? And you're aware, and you can just go on a journey and try to make sure you're in line with those. And I think mortgage is one of the most opaque market ever. So effectively, I think nobody ever knows what a lender will think when they get an application. Even the concept of applying, in my view, is obsolete, right? I think the other part of that is beyond transparency, the rules of the game is about changing the rules of the game. Let me put it this way, which is what we also want to do. So I found out that the way mortgages are underwritten today, so the way a credit decision is made, is the same as it was made 20 years ago. And in an age where you had zero digital data, very few information about customer, no open banking, nothing. And of course, what you do, you have a simplified scorecard or a simplified cookie cutter metrics that say yes, no. today doesn't need to be that. Today you can be much more sophisticated. You can really try to assess intrinsic risk of a person, regardless of whether he or she ticks a box, and that would enable many, many more people to get a mortgage today, right? And this is all about affordability rules and so on. So we are, and Molo, we believe we can change that. We can just bring it up to the 21st century, and this will unlock access to home financing for a lot of people that today, unfortunately, cannot still buy a home.
Okay, so what part for you do automation and AI play in delivering a really good, brilliant, possibly customer experience? How do they make that difference?
So they are critical. I would say that I think automation in particular is at the heart of what Molo does. So we have not just, so it's super interesting. We have not, when we say we're a digital mortgage lender, this is not just digital outside. It's not just, we have not just put up a website and then, you know, have an army of people that just do the same. It's completely the opposite. So we're tilted on its head, the approach. So we're really digital inside out. What that means is that we strive to automate everything. That's our motto. Everything that is done more than 3 times, it needs to be automated. So as a result, particularly for us, what that means is a couple of things. One, we have automated 95% of our lending rules, our eligibility rules. They're coded in our platform. The result is that as people go through the journey, they're applied right away, and effectively in a milliseconds, you know an answer, right? So which is very, very different to having an underwriter and picking up a paper application and then taking hours to review. So automation of credit decisioning is probably the secret sauce of Molo, and I cannot stress enough how important that is. We have not done a huge use of AI for now, mostly because there are because of regulatory framework. So AI is not deterministic in the way it operates, and we do need to keep an audit trail of decisioning. However, this is a little bit of a stage 2 of a development which will initiate in the next year or so, because now we have enough data that we can also prove, you know, things. And so it will definitely be an important step. But beyond that, I don't think anything is possible today without really automating. That's the whole point. The more you automate, the better customer experience is faster. By the way, the lower the operational risk. We should not forget that. So, you know, less human error, and at the end is a win-win for everybody. Absolutely.
And you can see immediately how automation can, first of all, accuracy is there. Also, then it can speed up the process. I suppose, you know, buying a property is one of the biggest, is probably the biggest purchase that most of us will ever make. So there's a lot of risk there, as you mentioned. Also, there's that need to be able to understand where the progress. So does that enable you to offer people more information as they go along as well? Because that would be very popular with customers.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's super important, because that is one of the greatest benefits of all, I think. So because every decision is automated, first of all, is instant. So we really rely on instant decisioning. You can know on the first screen of our journey whether it be accepted or declined or not. And that already eliminates a lot of pain points. It's very transparent. So you get a response. It's very responsive, right? Which is what you expect today in any digital experience. So you know upfront. You don't need to wait for somebody to decide. Decisions are instant, and it's immediate feedback loop to the customer. But second, I think the other thing is in terms of transparency, is because everything is coded, everything is precise, is done. So effectively, the report or the updates you can send to the customer, you can send many more updates because they're automated. So we send emails every single step. You know exactly where you are. You can click on a link and get an updated dashboard. So because there is no really workload for us to provide our customers an updated view and transparent view, then we do it. And then they have any point in time, they have a clear view of where they stand, which a lot of our customers, they like a lot.
It's been very difficult for other providers, from insurance to banking to lending, to change what they do quickly. Do you have any advice so far in your journey that you could give to others about how to support customers in times of need, to be personable? Because that's a very important part of all our conversations at the moment, is how do you offer that human touch? Any advice for those guys? And obviously you don't have to give away all of your secrets.
No, absolutely. Maybe I would say a couple of things. So one is, you know, digital channels are here. They're not an if. It just embrace it, okay? Because I still see a lot of, let's say, legacy lenders or maybe other companies are still wondering, should they embrace digital, go online, have a direct to consumer proposition? The truth is, is a must. So it's something that for the future, you know, the customers of tomorrow, that's the first, it's proven now. This is the first touch point for everybody. Just go for it. And don't worry about cannibalizing your other channels, which is what one thing that everybody worries a lot. The truth is, if you don't cannibalize it, somebody else will do. So just go for it and build the organization, the skills you have in a way that this will be pushed. And the second one, which has been quite an important principle for us, is, you know, you don't need, at least that's what we say in Molo. We are digital first. We're not digital only. What that means is, you know, embracing digital, embracing digital channels doesn't mean that all of a sudden you don't talk to anybody. So in fact, it means that you give to every single customer the best experience they want. And you can cater for those people that want a little bit more human touch and those that not. So for example, we have a fantastic customer success team. They, you know, customers love the conversation. We're there for those who want, but at the same time, we don't need to take through a lengthy process all these other people that don't really want to bother with that.
Yeah. Where do you think the human touch is really needed? Where do you think that people will always come to you and say, hey, I need extra help, or I need extra advice, or I need extra information? Do you know where that would be?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of what are the touch points, the way we do it, and we kind of test in many ways, and this is what works best, is we always have a chat box that is always live, you know, 24/7. Then we have a telephone type of customer service and that you can reach anytime, and we have very, you know, responsive emails and so we use honestly all potential channels. We even tried WhatsApp, and so all the channels work. So in terms of the where, in terms of the customer journey, I think there are 2 or 3 key moments, right? One is people reach out to us a lot when they want to have clarity on criteria, for example. So there is an element of information that sometimes if it's not clear enough on the website or somewhere else, people want to understand better. I think second is troubleshooting, and troubleshooting can be all sorts of things. It's not technical troubleshooting. Likely we don't have that problem, but it's more about understand for those customers that have maybe a slightly complicated situation, that before they go and submit an application, they want to test it with somebody. And so that is super helpful. And they really recognize that we're there, we're available, we always try to do the best for them. And I think these are the most important thing. I would then add another one, which is probably less relevant. It's been less relevant for us so far, but it's about vulnerable customers. So clearly, this is an important segment, and we need to do whatever it takes to give them an amazing customer experience as well. There are incredible tools today, even digitally, but the truth is being there in those situations, be able to recognize when these situations come up is as important.
It's quite difficult, isn't it, to balance the speed, the accuracy, the clarity. That's something that automation in particular can deal with. AI perhaps tackles individual specific tasks at the moment, but then the depth for vulnerable customers, the depth for the human touch is quite difficult to wrap into that. Do you find that people want general mortgage advice, or do they want sort of a bit of clean, simple advice that can get them to the next stage? What sort of a depth do you need to provide to them, do you think?
So far for us is more the second. So our customers so far, they don't really need it that deep mortgage advice. Was more about clarity and, you know, some hand holding or, you know, things like that. It might be because we naturally select a slightly younger type of audience and more self-direct by itself, so people that actually used to embrace digital channels so far. But I think it's also, we should not forget one thing, right? People are used to go online in any other experience. So, and then for some reason, we think that when they get a mortgage or get an insurance, they're not able to do it. So in reality, they do it every day. The philosophy we embrace, we don't see our channels as different channels. So we learn from all of them. So we also kind of periodically review what happens, what type of conversation we have with customer, because in theory, if they come to us asking those questions, it means we have not been clear enough online. And so we continuously improve that experience as well.
Yeah. So Francesca, in terms of, we've talked about customers and what we need, but also lenders also need something. They need perhaps a little help in terms of bringing all of this information, all of the different providers together. Do you find that the industry is a bit too fragmented?
Yeah, absolutely, Lindley. And I think this is one of the core issues why mortgage is not disrupted and not digitalized so far. Because by nature, this is a complex product. By nature, you need more checks than, for example, personal loan, because you need to value the property, you need to check the person, and so on and so forth. And so by nature, there are many, many people involved in this process. So you'll be surprised how every single player in the ecosystem blames the other about the fact that they cannot be fast and cannot give a great customer experience.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's quite interesting, because when we founded Molo, this was one of the key principles that we looked at, and we said, if we want to give customers an instant decision effectively, which is our dream, click button, get a mortgage, we need to own the full value chain. There was no way escaping that, because otherwise you're only as fast or as good as the worst part of the value chain. And so that's why, in fact, we built a full stack lender, front to back, going direct to consumer, owning also the experience with the customer. Yeah. But this is probably one of the core root problems of what we see today, honestly.
And it's not always possible to give the customer exactly what they want. Maybe they can't get a loan, or they can't buy that property through that lender. And that happens to all of us. And so by getting all that information in a row and making the process more easy for the lender as well, I guess then they can focus on things like being personal and being helpful to the customer, even if they don't get what they want.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We should not forget that, right? At the end, this is a lending product. So you cannot, by definition, unfortunately, you cannot lend to everybody. Yeah. So, however, I think that's where we found out that having, of course, having a customer service also helps, but that's where we found out digital experience can really make, in an instant decision, it can make a tons of a difference. So the two things that we spend so much time on, right? So one is optimizing the journey so that we tell our customer as soon as possible whether we can lend to them or not. We're not wasting the time. This is super transparent and instant, and they know even from step one if that's the case, which is contrary to what the industry does, where you actually submit an application with all your life in it, and then after 5 weeks somebody tells you maybe you are not eligible because of something that they knew since day one, right? Makes no sense. But then principle number two, and is being to the messages we share with customers when we cannot lend to them, and information we provide them to really help them to maybe fix their problems, right? Or maybe go on a journey to be able to get along with us. We really, you have no idea. So we produce content where we share information, we tell them. So we really optimize that a lot, also based on customer feedback, because we found too many lenders that just is like yes, no answer, which can be quite frustrating, because there's nothing bad with anybody. It's your fault as a lender. Your criteria are not fit for purpose. So it's not the customer problem, right?
Perhaps not for you guys, but for the wider industry, how do you think you can transition from person to person, or the human touch, into digital very, very well? Are there any areas that you think can be more easily digitized? Potentially the process and potentially the information given to customers. Any thoughts from you?
It's a difficult industry. The biggest issue is to disrupting the legacy thinking in a way, right? So how you do that? I think it's first. You need to do it in stages. At the same time, honestly, everybody should now acknowledge that we're not trying to educate customers to go online. Everyone today goes online for anything else. So we should almost forget that legacy thinking that says, oh, right, it's very difficult, people will not go online for mortgage, right? But beside that, I think the right way of doing is to start providing online information, start providing online journeys, maybe not all the way to the end. For example, everybody now, more lenders are starting to have a deep online, which is a first step, right? But then effectively educate customers and push customers when they come to a branch, where they come talk to an advisor, to tell them to use the online channel, because it's almost like you need to go through a little bit of an educational process, and then you find out that actually works very well, and then you can move forward, right? So I think, but then providing information, initial part of the journey, some of this basic decisioning online will go a long way to let people understand that, they can.
It's information is so crucial, particularly in this particular journey. Well, to wrap up, Francesca, what are your ambitions for Molo? What are your hopes and dreams for the company you've created?
Well, we have big hopes and big visions since the beginning, right? So I think Molo was born to bring mortgages to a digital age, and that's what we want to do. Starting from UK and then expanding Europe, but then effectively I really see Molo as the player that will lead the digital disruption in mortgages. So our dream is at the end to get everybody to get a digital mortgage, but also to be able to be the one that unlock housing affordability and give access to more and more people to housing, to home ownership, because that's a highly important topic right now in this country and beyond.
Thank you very much for your time, Francesca. Great to meet you and to hear about Molo's journey, how you're using digital to disrupt the market and also improve the customer journey. Wonderful to meet you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Lindley. Thanks for having us.
Okay, let's welcome back our expert panel to talk through these ideas and reflect on some of the things that Francesca's just told us. First of all, Jason Maud. Jason is a Chief Technology Advocate at Starling Bank. Hello, Jason. Good to see you again.
You too, Lindley.
Nice to see you. Grace Hanson. Grace is Chief Claims Officer at Hiscox. Grace, great to see you again.
Great to see you again, Lindley.
And finally, you already know Martin Suter, Chief Product Officer at Centis at Smart Communications. Welcome back, Martin.
Hi, Lindley.
Again, feels like so long since we last spoke. Okay, let's begin by setting the scene, thinking about self-service automation. What level of sophistication have we reached, do you think? Grace, first of all, how sophisticated are we at self-service automation at the moment?
I think it depends on the business and the industry and the company, but in general, I'd give the industry about a 4 to a 5 on a scale of 10.
Out of 5? Oh, okay. Right.
Out of 10.
Okay. So Jason, 4 or 5 out of 10. Now, I'm sure that's something that you'll want to comment on.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, the insurance industry score I couldn't comment on, but the banking industry I think is higher. I think we're, more like 6 or 7. Right. Obviously, again, it differs from place to place. Starling is higher than that, and other incumbent banks are lower. But in general, I think we're doing pretty good.
Yeah, Martin, just a quick one to you. Do you agree with that? Do you think that so far so good, or is there a very long, winding mountain road to climb?
Well, I think self-service automation can be seen where a process allows for a high degree of standardization. However, if the processes are complex or very individual, there is still a lot to do.
Grace, what do you think is required to deliver really personalized and effective AI-driven responses in real time? That is at the top of the mountain.
Well, just as Martin said, first you have to have standardized processes, but then you also have to have consistent and available data about your customers. So without that, it's pretty much, a manual, ad hoc. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't kind of process.
Yeah. Is it not a case of focusing, as we talk about quite regularly, focusing the AI or the augmented bits on the jobs that can easily be augmented or convincingly be augmented?
Right. Well, for instance, again, I talk about voice analytics a lot, but if you don't have the capability to analyze the data from the voice, you can't do voice analytics. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And you're still at base camp, aren't you? That is essential. Jason, what do you think about that in terms of the development areas? Is it, you really have to focus on what's important, on what gets you there effectively. There's no point spitting out a piece of AI that doesn't really do the job very well, and that's happened in the past, and people see straight through it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also about applying AI where it's good to apply it. AI is a tool, and like any other tool, you apply it where it's necessary and warranted to apply it. You also have to make sure that if you're exposing AI directly to the customer, AIs are still, let's call them, fairly junior members of staff, and they can make mistakes and say things that are confusing or will annoy the customers when they realize if they're directly exposed to a bot. So that has to be taken into consideration as well when you're considering where to apply AI.
It's true. They've pretty much been through the induction course, but not much further. So, Grace, how can AI be promoted to drive slightly more intelligent decision making?
I mean, I think a business that wants to incorporate AI has to think about what are the priority items that will deliver value for them, and then ensure that they gather the data for them. So if you're a customer call center, clearly you need to get the calls. If, for instance, you're talking about delivering digital messages, then you need to be gathering maybe data about propensity or usage or things like that. So You just have to be thoughtful about what you want to achieve and gather the information that's important for that particular process, so that you can use AI. I mean, AI to me is kind of it's a spectrum of what I call computer delivered services.
Yeah, exactly.
And the more simplistic ones, most of us are doing now, and the more complicated ones we call AI. So
yeah, it's still slightly mislabeled, isn't it? We're not quite there yet. But Martin, what do you feel about this as well? I mean, it is, if you don't understand the problem, you don't really understand what customers are having a problem with, you can't design well, and you really need to make sure that this thing is fit for purpose, and probably right now very niche.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I think, so first of all, AI is just an enabler, and I see a lot of potential in a lot of parts of the process when it's, for example, about to receive and evaluate kind of unstructured data instead of having manual lookup or having OCR services there. So there is a lot of potential. However, every time you need two things. You need to know the context where the request is coming from, and you need the data how to react on that specific request.
So Grace, what about legacy and poor data quality, which will always be a challenge? I'm assuming perhaps one day they won't, but how are you overcoming those?
Candidly, we're overcoming it with one problem we want to solve at a time. We identify the problem, we determine which data we need, we look to see whether it's clean, available. If it isn't, we work to cleanse it and we make it available. There's quite a bit of work involved in that. And now there are more and more tools to help us with that, or vendors. But I think it's kind of just hard work.
Self-service automation, I'll throw this to Martin if that's okay with you. It's about so much more than just applying a software solution to it. It's about back office transformation. It's also about understanding customer needs, really understanding what they want. And also it's about choice, so that customers can still choose to go to a real human. So I suppose there's a lot of transformation in the back office that still needs to happen, and that might even just be mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So I already mentioned that in the first episode, that a process must be digitized from start to finish. And that means it starts with the front processes, but continue through to the back office. So, and here there are no code or low code systems also here, by directly involving the business users in the process design. And I think that's crucial to build up, to be able to build up the right process.
Yeah, and Jason, I always defer to your expertise on these matters. Again, to design a process to make sure that the organization is ready to apply well these new tools and techniques, customer facing. Look, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. What do I need to really focus on if I haven't focused on it already?
Yeah, you really need to make sure that you've got your systems all connected together, for example, because you don't. One of the big data quality problems is the fact that data is stored in silos which are not connected to each other, and that you have the same data repeated in 2 or 3 or 4 or however many different places, which is all slightly different. You've got the customer's name spelled differently in 5 different places. And that's the real problem. So making sure all your systems are connected, which system is generally in charge of which data, that the data can flow easily through well-defined, well-maintained APIs between all of the different systems. That is crucial, a crucial step to making sure you avoid this sort of legacy data problem. Another one is making sure you have a process in place that constantly updates and maintains this data, and doesn't just go, oh, we've done that now, let's leave it and let it rot, which is what often happens with data and code.
Unless, of course, you want to create a new legacy system, and which is exactly the way to do it, isn't it, really, Jason? And Martin, on that same point, and you've already referred to it, what advice would you give to anyone wanting to really integrate, this is what Jason's talking about, integrate customer-facing automation with the back office? What steps are very important to take into account from your point of view?
First of all, I think it's important to understand which touch points the customer have in the respective process, and which channel should be used for this. And this brings us to a so-called customer journey map, which can then be implemented. So here it is important that the back office moves closer to the front office and closely involves the people at the front. Only then can an overall customer experience be made possible. And on the technical side, it is central that the user interfaces are easy to use, and therefore UX design principles are taken into account in the implementation. And these principles also directly involve the customers to achieve the best possible user experience.
Yeah, and it's great for staff. You know, they absolutely essentially need not only access to the data, the information, the insights, but also needs to be easy to get hold of, because you're working under a time pressure here, actually, if you're dealing as a human with your customers. Last week, Ashok spoke of the importance of not leaving customers who don't want to use digital channels behind. So how can companies ensure a really speedy, seamless transition to human support when that's needed as well? Maybe I'll throw that to Grace first of all, you know, to try to mix the new and the more traditional, human versus augmented. It isn't an easy marriage sometimes.
No, not at all. Actually, I think, at least in the insurance industry, we're trying to offer omni-channel options. What we are probably not as good at is when a customer wants to switch midstream in a particular transaction from one channel to another. And actually, I see that personally when I call my bank. And as Jason mentioned, I get very frustrated with the AI. And I find myself pressing 0 frantically or going, representative.
Yeah.
Like, can I please talk to a human being?
Don't we all in many ways? I mean, or we'll be pressing those buttons very, very hard. Jason, again, this is such a crucial issue. And yes, Starling is set up to be much more, the interface is designed to be so much more up to date. But yet, of course, humans need to be in the mix. And if not customer facing, working with the technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Starling Bank has a big call center 24/7 with agents there to chat or to talk on the phone with customers and so on, because we recognize that there are the purpose of contacting customer service is not just to get an answer to your question. If that's all that needs to be done, usually you can just design the UI to make it obvious where you should go for that sort of thing. Right. Generally speaking, when people call up or chat on customer service, a lot of the time what they want is, an acknowledgement that a problem has occurred as well. Yeah. They want someone to be there emotionally to help them, to make sure that they have their pain acknowledged. That is the sort of the little mentioned, not mentioned enough side of customer service.
Before we've got a couple of minutes left, let's talk about IoT. I'll stay with you, Grace, for a second. There's some amazing work happening in IoT, and I'll talk to you, Jason, about this as well in a second, and data and AI. Look, to preempt customer needs. What do you think the future of claims in particular looks like? Because that can, if you process these things very well, en masse, can really join up the process from start to end and back again.
Right. Well, as I mentioned, I think the claims, the value proposition for the customer, like for instance, in a water loss, doesn't really start when they have the water loss. It really starts in preventing that water loss, giving them power over mitigating that. And that's what devices like IoT allow us to do. And we could even tell the customer, you have a water loss, we're sending somebody. So for instance, someone has a second home or they're on vacation, we can send somebody in even when they don't even know they have a loss, and we can go in, we can take care of it. I mean, that's kind of the anticipating and helping them along. And of course, then we have data and we can use that data to maybe even more effectively prevent loss for our customers.
How does that factor into banking, do you think, Jason?
The IoT stuff doesn't focus as much as it does in the insurance industry, but the AI certainly does. And it's being used to answer more and more complex questions, such as is this person who they say they are from their face, their videos they take of themselves from their ID. Are these transactions on the account legitimate, or are they fraudulent? Questions like that. There are a lot of applications that AI can be put to to do that sort of thing. And in every case where AI is used and machine learning models and that sort of thing, you always have to consider how you're going to explain these things to the customer. You can't just say, well, the computer told us to not give you a loan or what have you. You actually have to be able to explain why and how that computer assisted, AI assisted decision making made the decision that it did. And you can't just hand responsibility over to the AI. You have to be able to take that responsibility yourself and give that explanation, because you still need that trust.
Look, a huge thank you again to our panel of experts who will be back with us again next week to talk about the critically important topic of scaling personalization and avoiding the greatest pitfalls around data. Now, back to help us round off today's session is our panelist and pundit, Martin. Martin, great to have you with us still. What advice would you give to anybody thinking about deploying self-service automation well, or maybe they're struggling to build a really seamless user journey? What advice could you give them?
Well, I think it's important to involve customers directly and move forward in an agile way. In software development, this has been recognized, and one no longer tries to implement a program sequentially, that is from conception, then to development, and finally to go live with that. Now you start with an MVP, minimum viable product, and improves the application iteratively. So the so-called dual agile track is often used to collect and process user feedback in each iteration. And this is exactly how you have to proceed when you deploy a self-service.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned agility again, because you mentioned it earlier on, and it's really important to have that mindset to really start to almost rethink the way you approach the problems that face you. So look, one thing we did talk about was data quality and the importance of that. Next week, we'll be hearing from the FCA and our expert panel on how to ensure privacy and fairness at all levels and create scalable, actionable data strategies. But why does data quality continue to be such a big problem?
Well, the financial service providers have a lot of data in very different formats and structures and siloed, as we have heard before. And the data itself has its own validity. So, and furthermore, there are restrictions from various regulations that have an impact on the data as well. So these and much more are reasons why the quality of the data suffers. But it is precisely this data that is needed in a structured and harmonized way in order to offer a personalized customer experience via self-service offerings.
Yeah. Well, great as always. Thanks very much, Martin. A huge thank you to all of our speakers today. And that's the end of episode 2. Join us again this time next week to watch episode 3, in which we'll hear from the FCA's new Chief Data, Information and Intelligence Officer on her vision for ensuring transparency, fairness and privacy at all levels. That'll be fascinating. She'll also help us to navigate the many potential pitfalls when you're dealing with data, and we'll welcome back our wonderful expert panel sharing their insights on creating scalable and actionable data strategies. In the meantime, please do send us your feedback by completing the review form on the webpage right now. And of course, if you liked our broadcast today, make sure you share the page and get the wider conversation underway. Okay, well, thanks very much for watching. Great to have you with us. See you next week. Take care.